I want you to notice on the title of the course the word creation there. That means that we're going to be talking about creation as if there was a God who created everything, that there is a creator, and we're going to be true to the biblical record in this class. And so we'll be careful to be that way in this class. And also the word science, which implies that we're going to touch a little bit on math and on physics and on chemistry and biology and astronomy. And we're not going to shy away from any of those subjects. It will be layman's level, kind of high level stuff, but we'll learn some things that you'll think, man, I had enough of this in high school or college or whatever. I don't want any more of that. But we've got to get into those things, and I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. The good news is there won't be any test. I'm not going to grade you on any of this, and I'll try to make it as interesting and as fun as possible with diagrams and so forth as we move on to this subject. So, creation science. We're going to look at a lot of different subjects as we go through these 10 weeks. The first 3 weeks are really going to be related to the origin and development of life. Special creation versus evolution is really the battle going on in this subject right here. We'll be looking tonight at design inference. We'll be looking at the idea of information theory and DNA, how that relates. Darwinian evolution. Darwin started a huge movement with his idea of random mutation and natural selection. We'll be looking at a fascinating topic of irreducible complexity, which has really kind of come around sort of new in the intelligent design movement. The famous mousetrap, if you've seen some of that. We'll be talking about a little bit of that in the next few weeks here. And then finally, probability of life. How do you get life started to begin with? I mean, it's one thing to evolve life that already exists, but how do you get it started? How do you get life from non-life? And so we'll be looking at trying to compute. That's where we get into the mathematics, is during that week we talk about that. And really, this is our strongest argument as far as creation science is concerned, that argument related to evolution versus special creation. And then we're going to get into a realm that will kind of give us a little bit of heartburn or whatever, the age of the earth. And is it a young earth or is it an old earth? Is it billions of years or just 6,000 years? And so we'll be looking at evidence for a young earth. We'll be looking at the issue of starlight and time. How did starlight get here if the stars are billions of light years away? How did they arrive all that distance? We'll be looking at relativity. Radiometric dating. Everybody wants to know, what about carbon-14? Doesn't that prove that everything's millions of years old? We'll be looking at those issues. And again, getting into chemistry and physics and relativity and some things like that to go over those topics. And that's really our weakest argument as far as dealing with that. As far as if you're a young earther, I should say, it's a pretty difficult battle to get over, but we've got good progress being made on those fronts. And the flood, that impacts everything. I mean, the flood is fundamental to everything that goes on, both related to the Bible and as well as the evidence for against evolution and against old Earth and so forth. The flood is a huge thing. Noah's Ark, feasibility. How do you get all those animals on the Ark? The legends of the Ark, geology and fossils. What about all the fossil record and so forth, or lack of such? What about the Ice Age? How many Ice Ages were there? And then, of course, the Grand Canyon is the monument to a catastrophe. And we'll be looking probably at a video of the Grand Canyon one evening. And then Mount St. Helens is sort of a mini catastrophic event that occurred here in our own lifetime in 1980. And the flood is really the elephant in the living room. Nobody wants to talk about it in the scientific circles and so forth. And then dinosaurs and ape men. The kids always want to know about dinosaurs. So if you're a homeschooler, and you got little boys, they want to know about dinosaurs. Are they in the Bible and so forth? And ape men is a real rogues gallery of things that have been put forth to represent ape men. And then finally, the last week, we're going to get into this very strange idea of quantum physics. And I always throw that in there to just kind of wind the whole course down. We'll tether ourselves to the Bible and go out on a rope and see how far we can explore and so forth on some strange ideas, and then reel ourselves in back at the last minute so that we'll come back to earth and go back to our jobs the next morning as we get to those weird ideas. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So come every week. There's going to be different material every week that we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to repeat that much. Now let's lay the groundwork about the scope of different belief systems. We're going to talk about origin theories. How many different... Yes, ma'am? I will. Let me get this microphone. They did put one in here. Okay. Will this help, you think? Okay. I'll try not to wander too far from this as we go on. Origin theories, anyway. There's a lot of different camps out there in the creation science versus evolution realm, and we're going to organize those a little bit. We'll order them from the most conservative, at least biblically speaking, to the most liberal speaking. And so you've got the camp that I call the young earth creationist right here. And this group would believe that the earth was created in 6 days. The universe, in fact, was created in 6 days about 6,000 years ago. And why would you believe that, by the way? It's what it says in the Bible. Yeah, so you put the Bible first in that kind of argument. And you believe in inerrancy, and you're not really disinclined to believe or to ignore science. On the contrary, God gave us science. God gave us knowledge and told us to subdue the earth there in Genesis chapter 1. And so this is the young earth creationist position. And then, contrary to that, there is the old earth recreationist, I'll call it, position. And really, a lot of people call it the gap theory. This used to be fairly popular back when the Schofield Reference Bible. Anybody have one of those Schofield Reference Bibles out there? Gene, you and I do. There's several of them. Okay. If you look on the first page, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the commentary in the Schofield Reference Bible, they talk about the gap theory and how God created the original universe and earth in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that was where everything was created. And then something happened between verse 1 and verse 2. Something went wrong. Probably the rebellion of Satan and his angels and in heaven. And then there was a divine judgment on the earth. And so God, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, says the earth was formless and void. And so he created it all, and then he ruined it and recreated it again. And the big argument there is over whether the word was... the earth was formless and void versus became formless and void. And you can argue that in the Hebrew as to whether that word means was or became. Tohu wavohu is the formless and void Hebrew there. And there's a few other obscure references in Isaiah and Ezekiel related to this. And so, there's a little link in the internet links right there, apologetics article, really rebutting that whole theory right there. And the whole motivation, by the way, for coming up with this gap theory was to explain geology. Geology, 100 and so years ago, they were talking about how everything was created over a long period of time. The idea of uniformitarianism came about, and they wanted to be able to explain all the fossil record, which they thought proved that the earth was billions of years old. And so they wanted to come up with some kind of way to fit that billions of years into the Bible. So, okay, well, we'll create this fossil record in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, let God destroy everything and start over again. The fossil record's still buried underneath everything, and, God starts over again. And that's when the 6,000 years starts. And so that's also called the ruin recreation theory. So the whole purpose of the gap theory was to explain geology, and it's not necessary to do that. You don't have to do that. Based on what we know today, as a matter of fact, all the new things that are coming out in support of a young earth. And then there's this camp called the progressive creationist. Now, this is an interesting group. They claim to be inerrantist and literalist on the Bible. They are against biological evolution, which puts them in good stead with evangelicals. But they are for stellar evolution, meaning they believe in a big bang and billions of years. And so this puts them in good terms with many scientists who obviously believe in the big bang and in the many billions of years right there. Now, to reconcile these two, you've got to have life showing up billions of years ago, okay? Now, But you don't want to have it evolving by natural, random mutation and natural selection in Darwinian's view. So the term progressive refers to the idea that the various forms of life show up in spurts, that God creates life at various points in time and interjects and inserts these life forms all through these, billions of years that it occurred. And there's really no evolution going on. It's just God, every time God created the new creature at a different level of the age of the earth and so forth, He created it and stuck it out there. And so that's their idea there. Now, the problem that I've got with this particular view, the progressive creationist view, is it sounds good on the surface, but you really have to bend Scripture to maintain this point of view, the literal biblical view, that is. You've got to come up with this idea of pre-Adamic hominids. And all that's saying is that there were soulless men existing prior to Adam. Okay? You also have to have the idea of death before sin, which is a fundamental tenet of Christianity, is that death is a result of sin. It didn't come before that. And also, you have to get rid of the worldwide flood because it explains so much of the geology and that record right there. And you really want that if you're going to hold to the billions of years. And so you've got to say there was no worldwide flood. And the Bible won't let you do that because it says all the mountains were covered, 15 cubits above the highest peak of all the mountains. And the main proponent of that group is Hugh Ross. We've got a website, Reasons to Believe. There's a link to that if you're interested in looking at some of his stuff. There's also some rebuttals to that as well, I think, that I put in those links right there. I really like Hugh. He's a brilliant man, but I just can't handle his theology and his doctrine on that. And then there's this camp called the Intelligent Design Movement. Now, these are honest scientists who really have no biblical agenda, but they're simply against evolution because of the lack of evidence that supports that. They just can't understand how it could come to be. And so evolution in that sense is not able to explain all the complexity that they see. It has no explanatory power in their mind, and so they're against Darwinian evolution. Now, they see design when they see life, when they see the universe and so forth. They see design in that, but they're agnostic when it comes to any particular designer. They don't attribute that design to God or Elohim. They would say, for all we know, it could be spacemen that came from someplace else. They don't, which just simply pushes the problem back even further. But they don't necessarily they don't side with the creation. Young Earth creationists, certainly. And so in that stead, they're really just pure scientists. And it's a new movement, intelligent design, but it's also an old movement. It's been around. The teleological argument from design, has been around for a very long time. And it's being attacked by the mainstream. You've seen in the media, Kansas City and all that kind of stuff, the school board and so forth, not wanting to teach intelligent design. President Bush has had a few things to say about it. Interesting. The last camp that I want to talk about is the theological evolutionist. This is the group that would say, God can do it however He wants to, and I agree. He could have created it any way He wants, but in their opinion, God used evolution to create everything, all the life that we see. And so basically, God gets the ball rolling and then put hands off, has nothing to do. He's basically unemployed at this point. He just kind of he makes all the laws and starts everything and then lets it go. And where the Bible disagrees with science, they would say science wins. And those passages where it does disagree are not literal, and they are some sort of allegory. And it's a compromise position. The thought process is that evolution must be true because it's so mainstream. So many scientists believe in it. And I was taught it in school, so therefore it must be true. And then finally, the last camp, the atheistic evolutionist. Now, that's the natural fit. They don't believe in God. You got to come up with some kind of plausible story for how we got here, and so they say evolution did it. Now, it used to be that prior to Darwin, the atheist had no plausible story for explaining how everything, origins, how everything came to be, and they were really just an eccentric group that just sort of an odd group that didn't believe in God, and you really couldn't understand why would you? I mean, look around you. Romans 1:18 tells us, by the evidence of creation, it's clearly seen that God exists. But naturalism is their God. That means that there is no room for God, that everything is just simply matter and energy and out there, and that's their God. And they define science to exclude any kind of supernatural event. No, that's just a cop-out as far as they're concerned, to have to say, well, I can't explain it, so it must be God, right? No room for God in their science like that. So that's the atheistic evolution, and that's where a great number of scientists would fall, is in that camp. Now, why believe in evolution? What's the motivation for believing in evolution to begin with, if there's so much problems with it? And there are. We'll talk about that. Well, I mean, you can say there is no God, and so therefore there must be a natural explanation. And so that's a reason to believe in evolution, an obvious reason. Or you can say, I really don't want there to be a God. I don't want to believe in one because it frees me up to do whatever I want. If there's a God, then I'm responsible to Him. I'm accountable to Him, and I have to be worried about whether I'm going to go to hell or not. I don't want to worry about that. So let's believe in evolution. Kind of crawl in the grave and pull the dirt over our heads, as Dr. Rogers used to say, when we die. And then finally, you can say, well, there is a God, but science must be right. That's the theological evolutionist position. And so therefore, I'm going to choose to believe science, and that's just simply how God did it. So those are the motivations for believing in evolution. Now, by the way, we have all the same facts. There's no disputation about, the fact that we're here and that there is a universe and that there are stars out there and the world exists and life and all that. I mean, we all have the same facts, but we simply look at those facts and interpret them in from different viewpoints, from different points of view. So why teach creation science? Why do we do this? Well, it's an evangelistic tool for certain audiences, because in Hebrews 11:6 it says, For without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So if you're going to seek God, you got to believe in Him first, right? And you must believe that He is. And so this is an evangelistic tool for the one who doesn't believe in God. You got to say, okay, well, let's talk about whether God exists or not. There's a creation. And so if there's a creation, there must be a creator. And if there's a design, there must be a designer. So you learn a little bit about that and use it as an evangelistic tool. But there's another, and of course, Paul, when he spoke to the Greeks on Mars Hill, that great sermon, and he went around Athens and he saw the signs and monuments. Said, I saw an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. And he says, therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing Him, I proclaim to you, God, who made the world and everything in it. And so he's using creation science, who made the world and everything in it, as an evangelistic tool. Because he's got to convince these pagans and idol worshippers that there is a God before he can talk to them about Jesus Christ and the cross. For in Him we live and move and have our being. I love that. So you see that if we're trying to evangelize people who do not believe in a creator God, you've got to have some sort of foundation to build upon, as Paul did right here. But I think there's also an important reason for teaching creation science, and that is to build our faith, because it's under attack. Satan doesn't want you to believe in God. And any kind of wedge he can get in there in your thought process and your thinking and so forth, he'll try to take advantage of. And particularly if you're a student in school, high school student, college student, taking courses like this, you're going to be exposed to all of these evolutionary theories and so forth. And so the shields that you can put up to defend against the fiery darts of the attack of the evil one would be studying, something like this. And so I think we're all susceptible to our faith being challenged, and I think this is a good reason for studying in these subjects. It's part of God's command to subdue the earth, as I said. Okay, what is science? I mean, the goal of science is to explain the physical world that we live in. And one way to explain what is science is by saying what they do. What is it that a science does? Well, this is what a scientist does. He uses the scientific method. He sees a phenomenon, makes an observation of what he sees in the natural world, and he develops a hypothesis that explains how this came to be. And after he develops this hypothesis, he comes up with a test to prove or disprove that hypothesis, to test the hypothesis. And so he exercises this test, and if the test succeeds, he repeats it, and he sends the test off to other scientists, and they perform the same test, and so they repeat it over and over again. And all it takes is for one failure of that test, and he's got to go back and redo his hypothesis and come up with some new hypothesis and therefore some new test. And so in order for it to be science, it must be falsifiable, because science, in essence, progresses by proving itself wrong. And you think about that. I mean, unless you can prove it wrong, then you really don't have science. And so, but it also must be repeatable. You must be able to perform this test over and over again in different laboratories, in different areas, and so forth. And it must pass a number of times. And eventually, after many successes, you'll end up with an accepted theory. And perhaps it'll become a law one day. Somebody will do. But the accepted theory is the goal of the scientist. And how does evolution fit into this picture, by the way? Evolution calls itself a branch of science. And really, this is for hard science. This is for science where you're doing chemistry and physics and things like that. And so you need to be able to reproduce those tests like that in order to be able to do hard science. But evolution is a soft science. It's a forensic science or historical type of science, something that attempts to explain a historical event that happened in the past by looking at those evidence. And so you can always make up a just so story. In other words, this is what I see. Let me make up some sort of plausible story to explain how it happened. And if I can convince you, then perhaps I can get written up and so forth and so forth. But, by the way, this is something that you can do this is something that's true for the creationist as well. I mean, we have the same facts. Creation, by the way, happened some time ago, right? God on the seventh day said, "It is good," and He finished. And He didn't quit creating because He was tired. He didn't rest on the seventh day because He was tired. He rested because He was finished, because He was completed. And so creation is a completed event, so we can't repeat it. So right here, it's not repeatable, and it's not falsifiable because we can't do it ourselves. And the same thing's true of the evolution camp as well. Because it happened in the past, it's not falsifiable, and because it takes so long to occur, it's impossible to build a test that any one man could observe, and it's not repeatable because of that. And so we can't observe creation or evolution today. Now, creation science is ridiculed. I mean, if you believe in creation in the scientific realm, you're going to be treated with much disdain. But all I would ask is that they would evaluate the facts and evaluate the theories on the basis of their ability to explain those facts. So which one is the most rational? Special creation or evolution? Which one has the least problems? Show me one true example of life coming from non-life, say a rock turning into a frog. You laugh, but that's what they believe. Rain fell on the rocks for many millions of years and turned into a goo, and eventually became, lightning struck it and made life. So it came from a rock, in essence. You might ask where did the rock come from, too. But anyway, that's going farther than we need to. Or show me one example of the simple life form evolving into a more complex life form by some stepwise process. Show me one example of a migration from an invertebrate to a vertebrate. If I could see one example of any one of those things, then I'd be an evolutionist too. Case closed. But there are none. Evolution is an historical science. It looks to what's what happened in the past, and it's just how we interpret that evidence. And so there's this idea of an a priori commitment, meaning derived or designating by the process of reasoning without reference to any particular facts or experience. In other words, knowable without appeal to a particular experience. Either you believe in God or you don't believe in God. And if that's the glasses that you're interpreting all this evidence, all the same facts that we're looking through. And so we both have an a priori commitment, ours to the Bible and theirs to the atheistic idea of there was no God. Now I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was nothing, and then it exploded. Good way for it to start, right? Nothing exploded. And there was this huge rock that got formed from that nothing that exploded. And on top of this rock was this brown, sticky, bubbly substance. And there was some aluminum in the rock, and over millions of years, the aluminum started to form a cylinder around this sticky, brown, bubbly substance, creeping up the sides, trapping some of this liquid. And after many millions of years, it formed a top on that liquid and a little tab on it like this. And so it resulted in this little object right here. I'm insulting your intelligence, I know, I'm sorry, but I'm making a point here. And then paint falls from space, red paint and white paint, and forms the words Coca-Cola Classic, 8 fluid ounces, best if used by date on the bottom of the can. And, how did this Coke can come to be? I mean, that's an absurd story, right? You wouldn't believe in that. Now, has this happened by accident or by purpose? Obviously, this was a purposed event right here. Now, let's take a look at this banana, though, okay? Now, this banana, I want you to notice, has 5 ridges on it. And those ridges are spaced in such a way that they fit with the kind of ridges on the inside of my finger so that it grips just perfectly. And this banana has a non-slip surface which the maker of the banana has decided to give it, which wasn't, by the way, Chiquita. And there's a built-in freshness indicator on here. Green, too early. It is a little bit green, isn't it? Yellow, just right. Black, too late. Okay, we don't want a black one right there. There's not one of those on this, by the way. No freshness indicator on here other than date on the bottom of the can. Right here. And there's a tab on the top of this banana for ease of entry, just like there's a tab on that can right here. And the wrapper peels away, and it's biodegradable. You don't have to worry about recycling this wrapper or anything like that. And it's a palatable, chewy, tasty substance in there. It's good for you, by the way. And, to make the whole process so much easier, Almighty God has designed this banana with a natural curve so it points directly to your face, making it so much easier to eat. I'll finish that later. But who could design a better product than that right there? And, they grow on trees. That's amazing right there. I need to credit Ray Comfort, if you've ever heard of him. He's the one who told that particular story about the Coke can and the banana right there. But that's the argument from design. And there was a man by the name of William Paley who posited this particular argument back in 1743 to 1805 is when he lived. He wrote a book called Natural Theology. And in this book, he told the story of a man walking through the woods. And he comes across a dry creek bed, and he sees some pebbles laying on the ground, and he picks up one of those pebbles, and he says, that's a shiny little pebble, nice and smooth and everything. It must have been here for thousands of years and rolling around in that stream, kind of smoothing it out, and he tosses it back down and doesn't think much more about that pebble. But he walks a few more steps down the trail, and he sees a watch laying on the ground. And he picks it up, and he immediately thinks somebody's lost this watch. And he would immediately know that this watch was made by a watchmaker because it's designed and it's specifically suited for the purpose of telling time. He wouldn't confuse the watch with the pebble as far as that's concerned. And so William Paley used this idea. He took some logic and he said, watches or machines require design. That's his major premise of his logical statement here. A machine requires design. That's obvious. I mean, the watch is a machine. It requires design. And intricate machines require very intelligent design. And a watch is certainly intricate. And his minor premise is that watches are machines, and so therefore watches require design. That's a real simple logical argument right there. But he says, machines require design, major premise, minor premise. Life is like a most complex machine. He observed how humans and animals and all that work and reproduce and so forth. Just incredible, the complexity within life. And he didn't understand DNA and molecules and all that kind of stuff, cells and so forth. But he says living beings are like intricate machines, and so they're well suited for survival and reproduction. And his conclusion then was that life requires a most sophisticated designer. And so, the book goes on for pages and pages, building upon this argument here. But this is the argument from design, the teleological argument. There was a man by the name of David Hume, philosopher from Scotland, lived a little bit earlier than, they overlapped a little bit, but a little bit earlier than William Paley. And he objected to this idea of argument from design, the teleological argument. He said, really, you're using a weak analogy. He says, life's not like a watch. And he says life has the appearance of order and purpose, but order and purpose don't always result from design. Well, take a look at a snowflake. It's very ordered, but there's no designer of the snowflake, according to David Hume. And so therefore, life does not require a designer. And he started the whole movement. The Huxleys and so forth got into this, and there was a great debate between Wilberforce and Huxley talking about these subjects. But really, the modern atheistic evolutionist comes from all that. Darwin was greatly influenced by Hume. But what is design? What do I mean, or what do we mean when we say design? Well, if you go to Memphis State, you can actually take a course in engineering. And one of the courses is called Systems Engineering. In that, you'll look at how things are made, how things are designed, and the hierarchy of elements of design we're going to look at here with this, from the most complex, the simple to the complex. A watch, for example, is what they call an open loop system. It's got an energy source. Our watches today have batteries. Old watches had springs. That was your energy source. It's got a process, all the gears and so forth, a process, and then it's got an output, a display. It tells you the correct time, if you've set it correctly. And so that's an open loop system. It doesn't feed back on itself. From a systems design perspective, a watch is really a very simple design. A closed loop system would be like a thermostat, like in your house, okay? You set it on a particular temperature, and when the ambient temperature in the room goes up, it turns on the air conditioner or the heater if it goes down or whatever. And when it reaches that temperature, it cuts it off. And so it's got a feedback. It takes feedback from its ambient environment and modifies its behavior, or changes the switching on and off like that. And so another closed loop system would be like power steering in your car. You're driving down the car and you down the road and you want to make a turn. You don't have to turn it very hard because it's got power steering that senses the fact that you're turning that wheel and gives you a little bit of boosting, helping like that. And so that would be a closed loop type of system. Adaptive systems would be the next level of increased complexity or sophistication in systems design. The anti-lock brakes on your car. I don't know whether you've ever experienced those or not in a panic stop in a rainstorm or ice storm or whatever on slick roads. But anti-lock brakes will start to pump like that, and it's not you doing it. It's the anti-lock brake system that senses the fact that the wheels have locked up, the car's still moving, and it wants you to allow to turn those wheels in a jerky fashion like that so you can maintain control. That would be an adaptive system. It's adapting to the current environment that you're in, changing its behavior. And then you get into the realm of intelligent machines. Self-modifying machines would be a particular type of system design. Computers would be the best example today of a self-modifying machine. You can put a game in there and play a game, or you can put a word processor in there and do that, or Internet Explorer or whatever. Whatever you program it to do, it will change its behavior based upon that program. That would be a self-modifying machine. And then a self-diagnostic machine or design, systems design. That's like the idiot lights on your car when they blink red, saying your oil's low or overheating or whatever. I like the gauges myself. But they diagnose the behavior and give you feedback on that. Self-diagnostic machines. And we're getting increased sophistication in systems design right here. A machine that can repair itself. There's really only primitive examples of this. I mean, a word processor. If you're typing a word in on your word processor and it tells you you've misspelled this word, and sometimes it can repair it. I mean, the more sophisticated ones will actually fix it. It'll sense that you meant to say a different word, and it'll actually fix it than the one you misspelled it to. But that's about the most. A car can't repair itself. And although you've got self-healing tires and so forth when they get leaks in them and so forth, I've heard about those. The next or most sophisticated level will be a self-reproducing machine, and there are no examples in the world of this, only in the movies the robots and so forth that can rebuild themselves and so forth. Science fiction realm on this. But that's systems design. Now, remember the watch I talked to you about, that open loop system? Here's a watch on my wrist right here, but I want you to know that watch is nowhere near as sophisticated as the wrist it's sitting on. Matter of fact, my wrist is an example of every one of these design, systems design elements up here. It's adaptive. It'll adapt to the environment. It'll sweat when it gets hot. It'll close the pores down when it gets cold. It's self-modifying. With the same wrist, I can hold my hand and hit somebody with it, or I can caress, somebody, or I can play tennis or type or whatever. I can do all kinds of things with my wrist. It'll modify based upon the situation that I'm in. It's a self-diagnostic, the skin. I mean, it'll indicate by getting red when I'm getting sunburned or whatever, or pain is a self-diagnostic sort of thing. It says you're doing something you shouldn't be doing to myself. And self-repairing. You get a cut in there, it'll heal itself. Remember that, and there's only primitive examples in the real world, for man-designed world of self-repairing things, and self-reproducing. That wrist is constantly reproducing new cells and so forth. And matter of fact, our bodies completely will reproduce through the reproductive process. We're creating new human life as a result of that. And so we're examples of all these, and yet engineers can't even get past this point right here with much sophistication like that. Michael Denton wrote a book called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. And one of the quotes out of this book says, although the tiniest bacterial cells are very small, they are actually a micro-miniaturized factory containing thousands of exquisitely designed pieces of intricate molecular machinery made up of 100,000 million atoms, far more complicated than any machine made by man, and absolutely without parallel in the non-living world. He's describing what they used to call the simple cell, okay? Because Darwin thought the cell was just an amorphous blob of protoplasm, goo or something. He didn't know that inside this cell are the ability to coordinate the flow of materials in and out of the cell wall, the membrane of the cell. And that there are little robots flowing around all inside the cell, little robotic machines that carry out tasks like putting proteins together and unzipping the RNA and DNA and so forth, and going out and fetching various parts to build new cells and so forth and reproduce themselves. And it's all an automated factory that all happens at a very high speed automatically. And that there are control systems to regulate the fabrication of components with quality control. If a protein gets built and it's out of sequence, it'll reject it because it knows that it's been made incorrectly. And also error correcting. It's able to replicate its entire structure within hours. Cell division and mitosis and so forth for cell replication. And of course, all these things speak of design. If there's a design that you see in the body, then there must be a designer, right? That's a good logical argument right there. Now, what makes human beings different from other animals? I mean, God created us as simply part of the creation on the sixth day, created the land animals and ourselves. What is it that makes us different? The truth is, it's not the opposable thumb necessarily, okay? That's what they always used to say, the fact that we are tool makers and tool holders. But language is the thing that sets us apart from all other animal life. The fact that we can communicate in abstract thought. And God himself is a communicator and made us in his image. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, the Logos. And God himself is a communicator, a user of language. One of his prime attributes. And let's define what language is, because language is something that's certainly also designed, because language has this idea of semantics. Words have meanings, symbols have meanings, and we know what those meanings are, and a symbol doesn't necessarily have any connection to the meaning. It's just an arbitrary selection saying this symbol means this, okay? It doesn't look like this, it doesn't have any connection there other than the fact that by arbitrary agreement we agree upon what symbols mean. That's semantics, the meaning of symbols and words. And then language also has this idea of syntax, the positional rules of order, where you place your commas, how the verb goes before the object, and so forth. And different languages have different syntax, but each language has something called syntax. You remember the poem, "Listen, my children, and you will hear of the midnight ride" of Paul Revere. You know, it goes on talking about the one if by land and two if by sea, the lanterns hanging in the Old North Church bell tower, and Paul Revere was looking for the British, whether they were going to come by land or by sea. And how did it come to mean one lantern by land and two if by sea? It's just arbitrary. They just agreed, of some sort of pre-agreement, that that's what it would mean. If he hangs one lantern up there, it means by land. If it hangs two, and by the way, he hung two. And so their language, their little simple two-symbol language right here, had semantics, meaning of those symbols, but it also had syntax. What do I mean by that? Well, it had to be in the Old North bell tower. You couldn't hang it in the church down the street. It wouldn't mean anything. You know, you couldn't put it down in the front door. It had to be up in the tower and so forth. So syntax as well as semantics. Now, what's that? You want to correct us on that? It's the international code or whatever. It is. I call it Morse code. Dit, 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 da, 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 dit, dit, dit. What does that mean? SOS, which means help, save our ship, save our souls. You know, and to the S is the dit, 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 and the O is the da, da, da. And the dit and the da are the basic units within this system. Everything you need to know about the Morse code is right here in the entire symbol. By the way, here's a little waveform up here. If you want to try to guess what that means, or not guess, but try to figure it out real quick, you're welcome to do that. I'll give you a little. Do I have a prize? Yeah, I've got something. I'll give you a little prize if you can figure that out. But that's the Morse code, and so it's like a language, or it is a language. It represents a digital code transmission, the dits and the das, huh? Yeah, okay, you're getting close. The last one will trip you up a little bit, because you always want to do the song. Jesus loves you. That's right. Who got that? Who got that? Jim, did you get it? You can have one of these right here. That's just an old CD of from Answers in Genesis right there. And if you want one of those, I've got more of them. They're $3 a piece, so that's worth $3. Anyway, that's the Morse code. But languages are very sophisticated today. Digital code transmission is the way they transmit, information over the internet and so forth. The pictures that you take with your digital camera are all encoded and compressed and so forth into a particular type of language. And when they go across the internet and so forth, there are error detecting codes built into that language. There's a parity bit. It's got to add up. Each byte's got to add up to an even number. If it's odd, then we know that it was a mistake, and so it's error detecting. It's also, a lot of systems are error correcting. They have a little extra information there so that if it says something wrong, it can figure out what was wrong and correct itself. So error detecting, error correcting. There are compression algorithms and adaptive algorithms, because they'll compress if you take a picture of my face against this white background right here, the square picture like this, it'll compress the white area on that picture a lot more than it will the details of the face, and so it doesn't lose information in those details like that. So it's adaptive. It'll notice whether it's white and so forth. So very sophisticated on these digital code transmissions right here. And there's tremendous evidence of design in language. Language doesn't come about by evolution. It comes about by some sort of pre-agreed design right there. Now, do you recognize what this thing is? The double helix DNA strand, right? A little section of DNA. That's probably, 30 or 40 different nucleotide pairs. If you stretch that out, it would be, and if you put that to actual size, it'd be about 7 miles long. No, yeah, 7 feet long. I'm sorry, not miles. 7 feet long is how long the DNA in one of your cells would be in actual length like that, if you could stretch it out. And there's about 6 billion rungs on that ladder, that twisted up ladder, the sugar phosphates or the rails in that. We'll talk more about DNA when we get to the topic 2 weeks from now. But DNA is a type of language, by the way, because it tells you how to build proteins. It tells the body how to build proteins and how to build hair cells and how to build muscle cells and brain cells and skin cells. Each one of those would be different. And so the genes are the language of that. There's a digital alphabet in the DNA. It's made up of codons and so forth. We're having a lot of the same features that you saw about transferring pictures across the internet. Same kind of features in the DNA. It's a digital alphabet. It's got punctuation built into the DNA. Certain codons in that DNA have start and stop codes. There are certain ways that the DNA can error correct itself to ensure against mistakes to a certain level. It can withstand about 1% of mistakes, which is, by the way, is about the amount of mistakes you get in reproducing DNA cells due to cosmic ray bombardment. God saw fit to put enough error correcting in the DNA to be able to withstand the cosmic ray bombardment we get, which causes DNA mistakes in the replication process. And DNA is the same for all of life. In other words, the same code that specifies a gene for a human is the same thing that specifies a gene for a fern or any kind of plant life or animal life or monkeys or anything. It's the same code. It's the same language for all of life. And by the way, they say this is evidence, the fact that it's the same for all of life, that this is evidence of some sort of common ancestor, that we all descended from some common single-celled animal. Now, what do we say? That it's evidence for a common designer, exactly. And so we have the same software house wrote this language right here and built everything. And the DNA exploits the most advanced design concepts of any kind of coding scheme that we can come up with ourselves today. Now let's talk about the impact that this DNA, the fact that it's a language, a sophisticated language, the impact that this has on resurrection, by the way. When we die, go into the grave, some of you may get cremated, some of spread out over the ocean or whatever. I mean, when you get resurrected, how's God going to put your body back together again? Is He going to have to go pick up all those atoms that were spilled out and burned up and so forth and put them back together? No. All He needs is the specification that the DNA had in it. And He can put your body back together like it once was. Perfectly, by the way. It won't necessarily be fat or wrinkles and all that kind of stuff. But He just needs because it's the same DNA you started out with when you were born. All He needs is that information. And atoms are fungible, by the way. You're not the same body. You don't have the same atoms in your body that you had 5 years ago. They've all been replaced because of eating and expelling and so forth. And so it doesn't matter. A carbon atom is a carbon atom. You can use any carbon atom. It doesn't matter. So all God needs is that blueprint, the information, so to speak. And you saw this evidence of this in the movie Jurassic Park, right? What was the premise behind how they got all the dinosaurs? They found that little amber egg with the mosquito in it, and they drained out the mosquito blood, which had bitten the dinosaur, and they were able to clone all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. But so there's a rationale. I mean, there's some that makes sense. I can understand how that can work. Now, William Dembski came up with this. He wrote a book called The Design Inference, and he said there are 3 ways to account for any phenomenon that you see in the world, any kind of event. Whatever the results are, you can account for it in any one of 3 different ways. You can say, well, this happened by chance, a random event. And what are the aspects of something happening by chance? Well, it would produce some sort of irregular, random, no patterns, no specified. I mean, a bomb would make a mess, and it wouldn't be any kind of pattern in there. Chance. If I were walking along with a Scrabble box, and I tripped and spilled on the floor, the fact that it might spell one 3-letter word or whatever on the floor would be strictly by chance. I mean, it wouldn't have any meaning, and so forth. So chance is one of the ways that things can happen. And then there's necessity. A chemical law, for example, would say when you hang a string into a off a nail on a glass full of saturated sugar water and let it sit there for several days, what's it going to form? You ever done that experiment in school? Rock candy, right? Yeah, and it forms these crystals just hanging off that string. And the reason the crystals are there is because it had to be that way. The chemical laws, it was by necessity that it had to be formed like that. So that's another reason, by law or by necessity. And then finally, design. Somebody could specifically decide to do something in a particular way. The works of William Shakespeare, the sonnets and the plays and all that kind of stuff, didn't come about by random chance. They didn't come out because of some sort of law. They were designed. They were written specifically to tell a story. And so there's no pattern to the letters and the words that he wrote. They would be completely irregular, but highly specific, having meaning like that. And so I read a quote from a biology textbook saying the major features of the genome sequence are irregular. In other words, there's no natural law to account for them. The genes don't have to go in this particular order. That's completely arbitrary. But they're highly specified. In other words, unless it's in that exact order, it won't form the right kind of protein. It's got to be exactly this order. And so they precisely define the components of biological life. And so what was that? Design, yeah. That fit the exact attribute for design. A purposeful arrangement of parts is what design is. Now, a message requires a messenger. And DNA is like a message, right? I mean, it's language. And so if somebody designed this language and wrote it down, somebody had to do that. We didn't make up what DNA was, and certainly random mutation and natural selection didn't do it like that. Let's talk about the physics of information. But before I do that, you remember the movie Contact? And you may see that movie Contact written by Carl Sagan. One of you did. Am I the only pagan that went to see that movie? He was pretty godless, but it was an interesting movie because the premise of the movie was there was the SETI program, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and they were listening with these big radio telescopes to outer space signals and so forth, and they were looking for a message from the stars. And they, there was a blind man in the story, a character, and he was listening to a message, and he heard what he thought. He said, "Listen," and he was real good at listening for patterns and so forth. And he says, "That's the prime number sequence." And of course, the prime number sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, whatever. There's no order to that sequence of numbers, okay? And so they knew that if they had some kind of highly specified sequence, that there must be a message from outer space, okay? And so that's how they figured out there was a message. Question is, why don't they recognize the DNA as a message from outside of our world? If that's what they're looking for, we've already found it. We'll talk to you about the physics of information. This will be the last thing we talk about. I've got a CD here. And this is a brand new CD, blank CD. And if I weigh on a very accurate set of scales this CD, it'll come out to be, say, 0.3 of an ounce. I could stretch that out as exact as I want and weigh this blank CD. Now, I've got the exact same brand and whatever of a CD as that one, but I have downloaded onto this CD, burned this CD, so to speak, with Office 2007 Professional. And I was going to install it on my computer. I've got it installed on my computer right now. Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Access Database, all that stuff, all on this CD right here. Now, I weigh this CD, how much is it going to weigh? Same thing, right? So how much does the information weigh? This is a lot of information on this thing, a lot of man years, hundreds of man years of effort went into building the information on this software right here. It does very sophisticated things. What's the difference between what this weighs and what this weighs? See, so the information weighs nothing. Okay, now that has some interesting implications right there because the mass of the information is 0. Okay, doesn't weigh anything. Remember the old formula E equals mc squared? Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light, right? Okay, so mass, this is 0. Right here, m is 0. 0 times c squared is what? 0. Energy equals 0. C is the speed of light, which enters the element of time in there, speed, time. What is time? It's not in there either. Okay? So, because 0 wipes out the entire equation. So there is no time for the information. The meaning that the information is timeless. Okay? If there's no mass, there's no time. See, the real you is software, that DNA, not hardware. You're not your body. You're just simply the idea that God had, okay, out there. Consequently, you are eternal, like it or not, right? The question is, where are you going to spend eternity? You know, because, I mean, like Pastor said, you can't crawl in the grave and pull the dirt up over your head and hide. You know, you're going to be there. You're going to be somewhere. You will exist for eternity. So, just interesting implications of information. So, that's our first week. Next week, we're going to look at the idea of irreducible complexity. We're going to look at the grand scope of evolution, the transitional forms, the lack of transitional forms. We'll look at the human eye, how it works. We'll look at the fossils and so forth, what the evidence that tells us about that. Let me pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Father in heaven, thank you for this evening. Thank you for our love for one another. Sometimes we meet another Christian, Father, total strangers, yet there's this bond of love that we have. And so I thank you for that. I thank you for your creation. I thank you for this church. I pray that you'd go with us now to our homes, watch over us, bring us back to worship next Sunday. And we ask you for these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.